Well, HGER 2.0 is required because of a variety of reasons, but the most important being, after evaluating thoroughly the achievement under HGER 1.0, we thought there is a need to launch a second phase of the reform so that we consolidate those gains, build further on those gains. But also, as we have a very big ambition in the 10-year development plan, achieving those ambitious goals set in 10-year perspective plan require significant amount of effort, reform. There are a lot of work that needs to be done. So by and large, the sense is, despite our general success in HGER 1.0, in keeping the economy running, a very resilient economy, significant economic growth despite global challenge, a number of reforms in macro, structural, sectoral areas, but there are serious gaps that remain. Unless we introduce a new set of reforms so that we can maintain the gains from HGER 1.0 and build further on, it would be very difficult to achieve the ambitious goals set in 10-year perspective plan. So by and large, we wanted to make sure we are on track on the 10-year perspective plan. That's a very interesting question. HGER 1.0 had set a tone for a major economic reform in this country. It's a fundamental shift in how the government thinks about the economy. Right? We introduced major reforms in the macro area. We introduced major reforms sectorally. The macro area, for instance, for the first time we've introduced modern monetary policy, modern financial and fiscal policy. The Treasury bill we've been running for the last 3 decades was so weak and fragmented that it was not vibrant and it was not market driven. So but when we introduced the new Treasury bill market, we've seen a very vibrant secondary and primary market in the economy. We've not only been able to finance the government need, but we've also created strong pension funds, for instance. We've created very strong banks, opportunity for banks to diversify their investment opportunities. Sectorally, all those talk about agriculture was simply a lip service. I think a serious focus in agriculture, for me, had only started the last 4 or 5 years, because we've looked at agriculture completely anew. You have significant amount of arable land. You've dubbed Ethiopia as a waterfall of East Africa, but those were not combined. And we have significant amount of labor, in the rural sector. The idea of this cluster farming or duty-free privilege for agricultural sector, these water pumps, it looks simple, right? But I think it completely changed the mindset about agricultural productivity in this country. I can go on, but in all other sectors, tourism, for instance, the whole notion that Ethiopia is a country that has an amazing tourist resources with a phenomenal contrast in a country that has one of the lowest point in the world and one of the highest mountains, rich history, culture, civilization, scenery. But we've been hiding this from the world. The fact that tourism has become a center of growth, one of the sources of growth, I think for me was a rude awakening. So very, very significant gains in HGER 1.0. So similarities, essentially we want to make sure we keep the momentum going, the reform momentum going, both sector-wise in terms of overall business environment, but also more importantly in macro area. So in that sense, you can see there are some similarities. But there are also significant departures. First of all, here in HGER 2.0, we have 4 key pillars: macro stability, improving the business and investment climate, productive and competitiveness of sectors, but very close to my heart, civil service reform, which came as the fourth pillar. But this time around, we also added some cross-cutting issues, important pillars in their own: climate resilience and adaptation, inclusion, the social areas. We have a lot of promise to deliver to our public. So we wanted to make sure those are clearly set as goals in HGER 2.0. Food security, for instance. We have a safety net program that was running for decades, but eating the productive capability of this nation. So HGER 2.0 brings this at the center of focus. It talks about improving this program so that we can have food security, and we can talk about self-sufficiency and significant improvement in our dependency on others. I mean, dependency as a nation, but also dependency as a community, as an individual. For me, capability issue is important as an individual. So you need to have a very capable individual that can really deliver and work on his God-given potential. But that can only be achieved if we significantly change the way we've been approaching productivity, food security, and safety net. But when we talk about the departures, I think one important area is in the macro area. Of course, by and large, we have just maintained some of the most important reform that we wanted to achieve but failed to achieve because of the challenge we had globally. But sectorally, for instance, we're now talking about productivity and competitiveness. So we're not just talking about awakening those sectors and expanding the source of growth, but the notion is we need to create a vibrant, competitive domestic enterprises. You can expect significant Ethiopian brands emerging as part of this reform when we successfully implement HGER 2.0. Ethiopian brands that will compete regionally, but even beyond the region. But also we focused on entrepreneurship, on MSME, on startups. A very important departure. I think in HGER 1.0 we broadly focused on productive capability across sectors, but now we're zooming in. We're seeing the capability of our youth entrepreneurs. We had this notion of Ethiopia being a startup nation. I think you will see in HGER 2.0 this is translated into specific strategy because we are assuming an entrepreneurial society that can compete within the country and globally. Also, I think in HGER 2.0, the role of the state is redefined anew. We have an entrepreneurial state. It's a very important notion. So what we're saying here is that the state needs to enhance the full productive capability of the nation by investing in innovation, by creating capabilities across different sectors, by investing in research and development, but more importantly, by changing mindset. So there is a complete shift in mindset now because the state itself wants to be an entrepreneurial state. As we manage the economy, we look at the full potential of the nation and see things that are wasted, that are not fully deployed. So if you are an entrepreneur, you would say, okay, how do I combine this resource with that resource so that it can be more productive? How do I create conducive environment for the youth so that they can be entrepreneurial? How can we provide a little bit of resource support to our young in technology so that they can create the next Facebook, the next Uber technology, whatever it may be, that can solve problems of the nation, but problems of the world at large. So the state, we believe, should do only things that the private sector is not able to do. We're not talking about the state that competes with the private sector or that crowds out the private sector. The idea is actually to significantly crowd in the private sector, crowd in the country's large potential, whether it's mineral resources, tourism resources, agricultural resources, and as an entrepreneur would think, put it to profitable use for prosperity of the nation in a way that benefits everyone in the country. There are significant departures, but the civil service reform, to just add one last point, is another important difference. As ambitious as we've been in HGER 1.0, one area where we have failed to seize, we have ignored the fact that we have a very poor civil service delivery that would not be able to carry on that reform, to take that reform to its end. So unless you completely overhaul the civil service capability and capacity, there is no way you can deliver on those reforms. So here you have civil service reform as an integral component of HGER 2.0. So I think those are really very important departures that one can take note of. Well, there are several lessons that we have drawn from HGER 1.2. We've made a thorough assessment of our achievements and our failures. I think one important lesson is we probably have failed to anticipate some potential risks. We were optimistic about the prospect of the global cooperation, the prospect of stability and peace in the region. But under HGER 2.0, what we've done is we have included a risk mitigating measures. We have identified potential anticipated risks that might come, and then included serious risk mitigating solutions. I mean, I can give you a couple of examples. For instance, in HGER 1.0, there was a financing need that we identified, and then we have included this as part of our pledge. But then that comes through as expected. What if the resources that we expect fail to come? So would that mean HGER 2.2 would only be partially implemented? Do we discontinue these important reforms? No, not at all. That's why we've said, okay, we expect this resource to come, but if they fail to come, we have to look for alternative source of financing, expand the horizon of partnership. You probably have seen some movements in this sense because bilaterally and the regional platforms, we are significantly expanding partnerships so that we work with everyone who has the interest of Ethiopia at heart. So that's very, very, very important. And second, what if there are unforeseen natural disasters or conflicts? For this as well, I think clear risk mitigating factor solutions are devised and included in HGER itself. So as part of the HGER plan, we've already anticipated potential risks and put in mitigating factors. For instance, natural risk identification and adaptation is something that we've not focused on, but this is now a center of HGER 2.0. Whether it's natural or man-made calamities, identifying those early on and putting in place proper mitigating solutions is included in HGER 2.0. Another important thing is ownership of the reform. I think we've made significant change in HGER 2.0. First of all, in terms of developing the program itself, I think much better than HGER 1.0, this went through a thorough consultative process. I remember the amount of time we spent sitting down with different sectoral ministers in the private sector, partners, so that they can understand, we can understand their viewpoints and make sure it's properly included in our reform program. So very inclusive program development process. But then we also have set an important governance structure. Now this reform is owned by the macro committee, was chaired by the Prime Minister, but at federal level we have interministerial steering committee chaired by Minister of Finance and Minister of Planning, and then there are sub committees at sectoral levels for each important pillar. But this time around, we've also included a very clear governance structure for regions, at regional level, for all regions. These committees are chaired by the presidents of the region, so that there is full ownership of the entire cabinet at regional level. And then they follow the same structure at the federal when it comes to sectoral and thematic areas. But we've also opened up this for public monitoring. There will be a private sector advisory group, there will be a youth advisory group, there will be a civil society advisory group, so that this reform is owned fully by the entire nation. Look, a national development goal is a collective enterprise. There is no way you can achieve meaningful economic transformation unless it's fully owned by all Ethiopians. It's a collective enterprise. Everyone needs to be part of it. And I think this governance structure in HGER 2.2 would allow for every Ethiopian to be part of the reform process in monitoring it, but also in implementing the reform. So I think those are very, very important lessons that we learned from 1.2 and improved in 2.0. HGER 2.2 in our 10-year perspective plan are highly intertwined. As you know, when the 10-year perspective plan is prepared, HGER 1.0 has served as a foundational document. The 10-year plan emerged out of HGER 1.0 as we were implementing HGER 1.0. So in that 10-year plan, we've set a very clear vision for the nation. We have established clarity on where we want to go in all key areas, in macro areas, in sectoral areas, in some of social programs. So HGER 2.0 then is a mechanism whereby you can enhance the implementation of these reforms so that you can quickly achieve the goals set in the 10-year perspective plan. So they are strongly interrelated. It's not, in 2.0 we are not setting new plans, we are not changing the 10-year perspective plan, we are actually working on swift and full implementation of the 10-year perspective plan. But HGER 2.0 gives a new momentum to that and ensure that there is meaningful implementation of the vision set in 10-year plan. HGER 2.0 contains huge promise to the public. If you see in HGER 2.0 document, I think toward the end of it, there are few pages that summarize the promise to the public. So I won't walk you through all those things, but I think to highlight some of the key areas, HGER 2.0 promises a stable macroeconomy. This is absolutely critical. We're confident that whatever goals we failed to achieve in 1.0 because of external shocks, because of different circumstances. We have challenges that came in force in 5 and 6. We're going to achieve under 2.0. So prudent fiscal and monetary policy, stable forex environment, price stability is absolutely critical, whether it's domestic price or external prices. Our promise to the public is that inflation would come down to single digit, and for this we want to work in a very coordinated manner on our monetary and fiscal policy, but also in sectoral initiatives, because the root cause of inflation is lack of productivity. That shows supply and demand. So this notion that forex shortage is the defining feature of the Ethiopian economy needs to change. We hope it will change in 1.0, but I think in 2.0 we will deliver our promise, and there will be a stable price, both internal and external prices. We also expect a much better investment and trade environment. Look, there is significant investment in Ethiopia, both domestic and foreign. And Ethiopia is a great place to do business, but it needs to be better. If you ask me honestly, is it still easy to start and do business in Ethiopia? Yeah. I think it begs a lot for improvement. So digitization of our licensing and taxation procedures, government services standardized and digitized, that it can be easy for the public to get service. A much more confidence building works around our investors and investment protection, whether this is asset protection or legal protection. I think we need to do more. So a significantly improved business and investment climate, so that people will truly say Ethiopia actually is a very good place to do business, where you can do business and prosper. Third, I think we hope there will be a very vibrant private sector. In 1.0, I think we've succeeded in rebalancing the role of the public and the private sector. I think that has been achieved because that excessive focus on the public investment has changed. We now have the state that focuses on key critical areas, but the private sector's role is significantly growing in the economy, but it needs to be vibrant. It needs to be competitive. It needs to think regionally. We hope to see businesses that aspire, to build a multi-million, multi-billion enterprises that would trade and produce for the region, for the world at large, a much more innovative private sector where new ideas would flourish, ideas that solve challenges in the local economy, but also challenge at the global level. So very vibrant private sector, but I think here an important point to note is we are MSME and startup focused, because what we want to do is to expand the base. Now when we talk about private sector, we're not talking about 10, 20 big businesses. Those are important in and of themselves, but unless you expand the base, unless you create opportunity for the majority of Ethiopians, you can't ensure quality and sustainable growth. So dynamic private sector, but with a significant MSME focus, entrepreneurship focus, skill focus. I think that would be a critical area of focus. So we create a very vibrant private sector, but then we also want to make sure our SOEs are fully reformed. In 1.0, we've achieved I think, critical milestones in SOE reform. We have now created EIH, an investment holding, but we want to make sure all sectors are open for competition. Look what we have done in Eyob Telecom. Because of competition, we now have a company that is feared and respected by its competitors. That's the result of liberalization and privatization. So we hope to create a much more open economy. So logistics sector will be open for competition. The financial sector will be open for competition. In fact, trade will be liberalized. I think this was probably the last stronghold for some of inefficient businesses. We need to shake that up. So opening up the trade sector would ensure that the larger public is served well. I think we've been protecting few businesses under the name of domestic business, but at the expense of 120 million Ethiopians. So there will be more liberalization as we go into the second phase of HGER 2.0, and the financial sector, as promised already, will be open up for competition. Another area I think will be digital economy. In digital economy, I think we've achieved quite well. Where we now have 3-4 trillion under digital transaction. Huge. I was checking on our currency out of circulation the other day. In just the last couple of months, it has significantly decreased. You know why? Because digitization is taking over. People now use digital payment for their fuel consumption, even in day-to-day transaction. They don't really necessarily need to carry a lot of cash with them. So we're not yet a cashless society, but we want to achieve that goal. But I think it would be a lot of digitization in government services, in private businesses, in B2B, business to business, customer to business. In fact, even G2G, as the need might be. So digitization. Ethiopia has started going digital, but I think to go fully digital under 2.0. In terms of civil service capability, I think another area is we hope to create a modern meritocratic civil service institution. I told you earlier, this is very close to my heart. The civil service needs to be reoriented. Every employee in Ethiopian institutions should come to work early morning to provide service, to serve his nation, for her or him to serve his nation. But the nation also needs to provide the right compensation for civil servants. So it's not a complex thing. We need to create a civil service where people are service-oriented, but they are also properly compensated so that we can attract the right talent, the right capability. And I think that is an important area of reform. Another one is significant enhancement in productivity. Then, remember we said we need to expand the base of the source of the economic growth, identified at least 5 sectors, and then made reforms so that other unknown sectors can emerge. But the focus now would be on productivity and competitiveness in mining, in logistics, in tourism, in agriculture. In all areas of the economy, we need to introduce competition and significant enhancement in productivity. If you look at the industrial sector, for instance, we have 30-40% of installed capacity utilized. That's a shame. We need to make sure 80-90% of the productive capacity of our industries are fully utilized. Well, these are a few of the areas that I would like to highlight.